The coffee shop was called The Grind, a small place on the corner of Main and 4th that had been serving the town of Cedar Lake for almost 40 years. It had survived the arrival of Starbucks 3 blocks away, the recession that had shuttered half the businesses downtown, and 2 changes of ownership that had threatened to turn it into something trendier and less authentic. Through it all, it had remained what it had always been, a place where locals gathered, where everyone knew everyone, where the coffee was strong and the gossip was stronger. 18-year-old Marcus Webb had worked there for almost a year, ever since he'd needed a job to help pay for his mother's medical bills and his own desperate hope of attending college someday. He worked the early shift most mornings, arriving at 5 to open up and prep for the regulars who started filtering in around 6. It was hard work, harder than people realized, but Marcus didn't complain. Complaining didn't pay the bills. Complaining didn't keep the lights on in the small house where he lived with his mother and younger sister. Complaining didn't get you anywhere. So Marcus worked. He made coffee and wiped counters and smiled at customers even when he was exhausted, even when his feet ached, even when the weight of everything he was carrying felt like it might crush him. The biker came in on a Thursday morning, just after 7. Marcus noticed him immediately. It was hard not to. The man was tall and broad, with a shaved head and a beard that reached his chest, tattoos crawling up his neck and disappearing beneath the collar of his leather vest. He walked with the confident stride of someone who'd long ago stopped caring what other people thought of him, and when he approached the counter, Marcus felt a flutter of something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't quite comfort either. "Large black coffee," the man said. His voice was deep, rumbling like distant thunder. "And one of those blueberry muffins. Coming right up." Marcus poured the coffee, bagged the muffin, and rang up the total. "That'll be $6.75. The man paid with a 10 and told Marcus to keep the change. A generous tip, more than Marcus usually got from the morning regulars, who tended to count their pennies and expect perfection in return. "Thanks," Marcus said, surprised. "Have a good day." The man nodded and took a seat by the window, settling into the chair with the ease of someone who had nowhere else to be. He pulled out a phone, old, battered, the screen cracked, and began scrolling through something, sipping his coffee, seemingly content to sit and watch the world go by. Marcus went back to work, but he found his eyes drifting to the stranger every few minutes. There was something about him, a stillness, a weight, that felt different from the usual customers. Most people who came into the grind were in a hurry, grabbing their drinks and rushing off to jobs or errands or the 1,000 small emergencies. That made up modern life. This man seemed like he had all the time in the world. Around 8:30, when the morning rush had died down and Marcus was restocking the pastry case, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a text from his mother, or maybe his sister, asking for a ride home from school. Instead, it was a notification from the hospital, a reminder of the appointment his mother had next week, the appointment where they'd find out if the latest round of treatment was working or if the cancer had spread again. Marcus stared at the screen, feeling the familiar weight settle onto his chest. His mother had been fighting for almost 2 years now. 2 years of chemotherapy and radiation, of good days and bad days, of hope, followed by despair, followed by hope again. The bills had piled up until they'd become a mountain he couldn't see the top of. The insurance only covered so much. The rest came from Marcus's paychecks, from his mother's disability, from a GoFundMe campaign that had raised a few $1,000s before fading into obscurity. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. He put his phone away and went back to work, but his hands were shaking slightly, and he had to remake a latte twice because he couldn't focus. The weight was there, pressing down on him, the way it always did when he let himself think about the future. At 9 o'clock, the biker stood to leave. He brought his empty cup to the counter. Most customers didn't bother, just left their trash on the tables for Marcus to clean up, and set it down with a nod. "Good coffee," he said. "Thanks. Anytime. Come back soon." The man walked out, the door chiming behind him, and Marcus reached for the cup to throw it away. As he picked it up, something fluttered to the counter. A slip of paper, folded once, that had been tucked beneath the cup. Marcus unfolded it and read, "You look like you're carrying something heavy. If you ever need to talk, I'm a good listener. Cole." Beneath the words was a phone number. Marcus stared at the note for a long moment. His first instinct was to crumple it up and throw it away. He didn't know this man, didn't know him anything, didn't need a stranger's pity or concern. But something stopped him, something about the simple kindness of the gesture, The fact that a man he'd exchanged barely 10 words with had noticed that he was struggling. He tucked the note into his pocket and went back to work, but he thought about it all day, through the lunch rush and the afternoon lull, through the endless cycle of orders and cleaning and customer complaints. He thought about the weight he was carrying, the weight he'd been carrying for so long that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. And he thought about writing back. That night, after his shift ended and he'd made dinner for his sister and checked on his mother, who was too tired to get out of bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a scrap of paper. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if he should say anything at all, but the words came anyway, pouring out of him like water from a cracked dam. My mom has cancer. Stage 4. She's been fighting for 2 years, and I don't know if she's going to make it. I work 2 jobs, and I still can't pay the bills. My sister's only 12, and she doesn't understand why Mom is always sick. I'm supposed to start college in the fall, but I can't afford it. And even if I could, I can't leave them. I feel like I'm drowning, and no one sees it. No one knows. I smile at customers all day and pretend everything is fine, but nothing is fine. Nothing has been fine for a long time. He stopped writing, his hand cramped, his eyes burning. He'd never told anyone these things, not his friends, not his teachers, not even his mother, who had enough to worry about without adding her son's breakdown to the list. He folded the paper carefully, wrote the biker's phone number on the outside, and stared at it for a long time. Then he went to bed without sending anything. The next morning, the biker, Cole, came back. Same time, same order, large black coffee, blueberry muffin. He paid with a 10 again, told Marcus to keep the change, and settled into the same seat by the window. But this time, before he sat down, he caught Marcus's eye and held it for a moment. "You okay, kid?" The question was simple. The answer was not. "I'm fine," Marcus said automatically. The words he always said, the lie he always told. Cole studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "All right, but the offer stands, if you ever need to talk." He walked to his seat and Marcus went back to work, but his hand kept drifting to his pocket, where the note from yesterday was still folded, waiting. At the end of his shift, Marcus made a decision. He pulled out a fresh piece of paper and wrote a shorter message this time, just the essentials, the bare bones of what he was carrying. Then he folded it small, tucked it under Cole's empty cup when he came to the counter, and watched the biker walk out the door without looking back. The note said, "My mom's dying. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to ask for help. I've never told anyone this before, but you offered to listen and I don't have anyone else." Below that, he'd written his phone number. He didn't expect a response. He didn't expect anything to change. He'd spent 18 years learning that the world didn't care about his problems, that help didn't come to people like him, that the only person he could rely on was himself. But that night, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Marcus answered it with trembling hands. "Marcus?" The voice was deep, familiar. "This is Cole. I got your note." "Yeah." Marcus's voice came out as a whisper. "I wasn't sure you'd call." "I always call." There was something in Cole's tone, a weight, a certainty that made Marcus believe him. "Now tell me everything, from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." So Marcus talked. For almost 2 hours he talked about his mother's diagnosis and the treatments that weren't working, about the bills that kept piling up and the jobs that barely covered rent, about his sister who still believed Mom was going to get better and his own fear that she wouldn't. He talked about college applications he'd filled out and scholarships he'd been denied, about dreams he'd quietly buried and a future he couldn't see. He talked until he was empty, until there was nothing left but exhaustion and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of having been heard. When he finally stopped, Cole was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus," he said finally, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Are you listening?" "Yeah." "You are not alone. I know it feels like you are. I know it feels like no one sees what you're going through, like you're invisible, like you're drowning while everyone else just walks by. But you are not alone. Not anymore." Marcus felt the tears coming and didn't try to stop them. "I'm going to make some calls," Cole continued. "I've got people, brothers, sisters, a whole community, who help folks like you. People who've been where you are, who know what it's like to carry something too heavy for one person. We're going to figure this out together. You understand?" "I don't." Marcus's voice broke. "I don't have any way to pay you back. I don't have anything to offer." "You don't owe me anything. You don't owe anyone anything. This isn't a transaction, it's family. Cole's voice was firm. Now get some sleep. I'll be in touch tomorrow. And Marcus? Yeah? You did the right thing reaching out. That took courage. More courage than most people have. Don't forget that. The call ended and Marcus sat in the dark kitchen, his phone still pressed to his ear, tears streaming down his face. He didn't know what was going to happen next. He didn't know if Cole could really help or if this was just another false hope in a life that had been full of them. But for the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel alone, and that, all by itself, was enough to make him believe that tomorrow might be different. Cole called back the next afternoon, just as Marcus was finishing his shift at the grind. "I've been making calls," he said without preamble. "Talked to some people, got some things in motion, but I need to meet with you face to face. Can you come by the shop tonight, around 7? "The shop?" "Ironside Customs. It's a motorcycle repair place on the east side of town, past the old mill. I run it with some of the brothers." Cole paused. "Don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds. Just a bunch of guys who like bikes and helping people." Marcus agreed, though his stomach was tight with nerves. He'd never been to the east side. His mother had always warned him away from that part of town, with its abandoned factories and rough reputation. But something about Cole's voice made him trust that it would be okay. He told his mother he was meeting a friend and would be back by 9. She was too tired to ask questions, just nodded from her place on the couch and told him to be careful. His sister, Jade, was doing homework at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed with concentration. She didn't even look up when he left. The drive took 15 minutes. Marcus followed the directions Cole had texted him, winding through streets that grew progressively more industrial, past warehouses and storage facilities and the skeletal remains of businesses that had closed years ago. Finally, he turned onto a gravel road and saw it, a large metal building with a hand-painted sign that read Ironside Customs and a parking lot full of motorcycles. There were at least 30 bikes outside, Harleys and Indians, custom choppers, and vintage machines that gleamed under the security lights. Marcus parked his mother's old Honda at the edge of the lot, feeling conspicuously out of place, and walked toward the entrance. The door was open. Inside, the shop was cavernous, filled with the smell of motor oil and metal, and something that might have been barbecue. Motorcycles in various states of repair lined the walls, tools hung from pegboards, and in the center of the space, gathered around a cluster of folding tables, were about 24 men and women in leather vests. They looked up as Marcus entered. He froze, suddenly aware of how young he must seem to them, how out of place. These were hard people, scarred and tattooed, their faces weathered by years of riding and living. He was an 18-year-old kid in a coffee shop apron that he'd forgotten to take off. Then Cole stood up from one of the tables and walked toward him, his face breaking into a smile. "Marcus, glad you could make it." He clapped the young man on the shoulder, steering him into the room. "Everyone, this is the kid I was telling you about, the one from the coffee shop." The tension in the room shifted. The hard faces softened. Someone pulled out a chair and gestured for Marcus to sit. Someone else pressed a bottle of water into his hand. Within moments, he was surrounded, not threateningly but protectively, like a family gathering around one of their own. "Cole told us about your situation," said a woman to his left. She was maybe 50, with silver streaks in her dark hair and kind eyes that seemed to have seen everything. "About your mom, the bills, all of it." Marcus didn't know what to say. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything wrong." The woman's voice was firm. "You reached out. That's what you're supposed to do when you're drowning. That's what anyone would do." "Her name's Maria," Cole said, settling into the chair beside Marcus. "She runs our charity arm, coordinates with shelters, hospitals, families in need. If anyone knows how to help you, it's her." Maria pulled out a folder, thick, stuffed with papers, and set it on the table in front of Marcus. "I've been on the phone all day," she said, "making calls, pulling strings, calling in favors. Here's what we've got so far." She opened the folder and began walking him through it. There was a grant from a cancer support foundation that would cover a significant portion of his mother's medical bills. There was a program through the hospital that offered reduced rates for families below a certain income threshold. Marcus's family qualified, but no one had ever told them about it. There was a local church that ran a meal delivery service for homebound patients and a non-profit that provided free transportation to medical appointments. "We've also talked to some people about your college situation," Maria continued. "There's a scholarship fund specifically for young caregivers, Kids who are taking care of sick parents while trying to get an education. It's not widely advertised, but it exists. I've put your name in for consideration." Marcus stared at the papers in front of him, his vision blurring. This was more help than he'd received in 2 years of struggling, more resources than he'd known existed, more hope than he'd allowed himself to feel in longer than he could remember. "Why?" The word came out hoarse, barely audible. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Cole leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You know why I started coming to that coffee shop, Marcus? Because a friend told me about a kid who worked there who reminded him of himself. A kid who was carrying too much, smiling through the pain, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't." He paused. "That friend was me, 25 years ago. 18 years old, mom dying of cancer, working 2 jobs and watching my whole future crumble. I know exactly what you're going through, and I know what it's like to feel like nobody sees you." The room had gone quiet. Everyone was listening now, their attention fixed on Cole as he spoke. "I got lucky. Someone saw me. Someone reached out. A man I barely knew offered me a job, a community, a reason to keep going. He didn't have to. I was nobody to him, just a kid in a coffee shop. But he did it anyway, because that's what you do. You see someone drowning, you throw them a rope." Cole reached out and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Now it's my turn. Now I get to be the one who throws the rope. And someday, when you're on the other side of this, when your mom's better, or when you've made peace with whatever happens, you'll get to throw the rope to someone else. That's how it works. That's how we keep going." Marcus couldn't speak. The tears were coming, and he didn't have the strength to hold them back. He sat in a room full of strangers who had become something more, and he let himself cry, really cry. For the first time in months, no one looked away. No one told him to stop. They just sat with him, present and patient, letting him feel whatever he needed to feel. When he finally collected himself, Maria slid a tissue across the table. "There's one more thing," she said. "The club took up a collection. Everyone contributed, doesn't matter how much. It's for your family. For groceries, utilities, whatever you need to get through the next few months." She handed him an envelope. Marcus opened it with trembling fingers and found cash inside. Bills of every denomination, some crisp and new, some worn soft from years of use. He didn't count it, but he could tell it was substantial. More than he made in a month at the coffee shop. "I can't," he started. "You can." Maria's voice was gentle but firm. "And you will. Because this isn't charity, Marcus. This is community. This is family taking care of family. You're one of us now, whether you like it or not." Marcus looked around the room, at Cole and Maria, at the 24 men and women who had gathered on a Thursday night to help a stranger, at the motorcycles and the tools and the hand-painted sign outside that read Ironside Customs. He'd walked in feeling alone. He was leaving feeling like he belonged to something bigger than himself. "Thank you," he said, the words catching in his throat. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank us," Cole said. "Just pass it on. When you're able, when the time comes. That's all we ask." Marcus nodded, clutching the envelope and the folder full of resources, his heart fuller than it had been in years. The meeting broke up around 9. People shook Marcus's hand, pressed business cards into his palm, told him to call if he needed anything at all. Maria walked him to his car and made sure he had her personal number, not just the official charity line. "The paperwork for the grant is already started," she said. "I'll need some information from you. Your mom's medical records, proof of income, that kind of thing. Can you get that to me by next week?" "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need." "Good." She smiled, and the warmth in it made Marcus's chest ache. "You're going to be okay, Marcus. It doesn't feel like it now, but you are. I've seen a lot of families go through this, and yours. You've got something special. You've got fight. That matters more than anything." She patted his arm and walked back inside, leaving Marcus alone in the parking lot with his mother's old Honda, and a future that suddenly seemed less impossible than it had that morning. He drove home slowly, processing everything that had happened. The folder sat on the passenger seat, thick with possibilities. The envelope of cash was tucked inside his jacket, pressed against his heart. His mother was asleep when he got home, her breathing shallow but steady. Jade had finished her homework and was watching TV in the living room, her feet tucked under her on the couch. "How is your friend?" she asked, not looking away from the screen. "Good." Marcus sat down beside her, feeling the exhaustion of the day catching up with him. "Really good." "That's nice." Jade glanced at him, then did a double take. "Have you been crying?" A little, but not for a bad reason. He put an arm around his sister and pulled her close. For a good reason. For the first time in a long time. Jade didn't ask more questions. She just leaned into him, her small body warm against his side, and they sat together in the glow of the television until she fell asleep. Marcus carried her to bed, then went to check on his mother. She was still asleep, her face pale against the pillow, but there was a peace in her expression that had been absent for weeks. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe. "We're going to be okay," he thought. "I don't know how, and I don't know when, but we're going to be okay." For the first time since the diagnosis, he actually believed it. The following Saturday, Marcus was working his usual morning shift when the rumble started. He heard it before he saw it. A low, rolling thunder that made the windows vibrate and the coffee cups tremble on their shelves. At first, he thought it was a storm coming in, one of those sudden spring squalls that swept across the plains without warning. But the sky outside was clear, the morning sun bright and warm. Then the motorcycles appeared. They came down Main Street in formation, 2 by 2, a river of chrome and leather that seemed to have no end. Marcus stood frozen behind the counter, his hand still wrapped around the espresso portafilter, watching as bike after bike rolled past the window. There were dozens of them, Harleys and Indians, custom choppers and vintage machines, their riders wearing leather vests emblazoned with patches he was starting to recognize. The lead bikes turned into the grind's parking lot, then the next wave, then the next. Within 5 minutes, the entire lot was full, and motorcycles were lining up along the curb, on the side streets, anywhere they could find space. Riders dismounted in a coordinated flow, their boots hitting the pavement in a rhythm that sounded almost military. Cole was at the front. He walked through the door with a smile on his face and 24 bikers at his back. "Morning, Marcus." He said it like this was perfectly normal, like an army of motorcycles showing up at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning was just how things worked. "Hope you've got plenty of coffee. We brought some friends. Marcus looked at the crowd pouring through the door, at the leather vests and tattooed arms and weathered faces. "What is this?" "This is the family." Cole stepped aside, letting the others stream past him toward the counter. "Word got out about your situation. People wanted to help, so here they are." The next 3 hours were chaos, the best kind of chaos Marcus had ever experienced. Bikers filled every table, every chair, every available inch of standing room. They ordered coffee and pastries, breakfast sandwiches and smoothies, everything on the menu, and some things that weren't. The kitchen couldn't keep up. Marcus had to call his manager, who called the owner, who came down personally and stood in the doorway with his mouth hanging open at the sight of 100 leather-clad customers drinking lattes and eating scones. But it wasn't just about the orders. Between purchases, the bikers came to Marcus one by one, pressing bills into his hand, slipping envelopes across the counter, leaving folded notes tucked under their cups. Some of them shared their own stories, mothers they'd lost, battles they'd fought, moments when someone had reached out and changed their lives. Others just nodded, a silent acknowledgement of shared struggle, and moved on. Maria was there too, coordinating from a table near the window, her phone pressed to her ear as she made call after call. Every so often she'd catch Marcus's eye and give him a thumbs up, a signal that meant another resource had been secured, another piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Around noon, when the crowd had thinned enough for Marcus to take a breath, Cole found him in the back room, surrounded by envelopes and cash and handwritten notes. "You okay, kid?" Marcus looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I don't understand. These people don't know me. They came from... I saw license plates from 3 different states. They drove hundreds of miles to buy coffee and give money to someone they've never met. That's what family does." Cole sat down on an overturned milk crate, his leather vest creaking. "When one of us hurts, we all hurt. When one of us needs help, we all help. It's not complicated. But I'm not one of you. I'm just a kid who makes coffee. You're a kid who reached out when he was drowning. You're a kid who's been carrying his family on his shoulders for 2 years without complaint. You're a kid who smiles at customers and works double shifts and never gives up, even when giving up would be easier." Cole's voice was firm. "That makes you one of us. That makes you family." Marcus looked down at the pile of money in front of him. He hadn't counted it yet, but he knew it was more than he'd ever seen in one place. Thousands of dollars, given freely by strangers who'd decided he was worth helping. My mom's appointment is on Tuesday, he said quietly. The one where we find out if the treatment's working. I know. I'm scared. The words came out before Marcus could stop them. I'm so scared that it's not working, that we're out of options, that I'm going to lose her. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Whatever happens on Tuesday, you're not going to face it alone. Maria's already arranged for someone to drive you and your mom to the hospital. There'll be people in the waiting room, people in the parking lot, people ready to help with whatever comes next. He squeezed Marcus's shoulder. You've been carrying this weight by yourself for too long. It's time to let others help carry it. Marcus felt the tears coming, again, always again, and this time he didn't fight them. He sat in the back room of the coffee shop where he'd worked for a year, surrounded by evidence of a generosity he still couldn't quite comprehend, and let himself feel the full weight of everything he'd been holding. Cole sat with him until the tears stopped. Then he helped him count the money, $4,247, not including the checks that would need to be deposited, and organize the notes into a folder Marcus could take home. There's one more thing, Cole said as they finished. The club voted last night. We want to set up a fund, the Webb Family Fund. It'll cover your mom's medical expenses, your sister's needs, whatever comes up. People can contribute whenever they want, however much they want. It'll be there as long as you need it. Marcus shook his head. You've already done so much. I can't ask for... You're not asking. We're offering. Cole's voice brooked no argument. This is what we do, Marcus. This is who we are. And now it's who you are too. He stood, brushing off his jeans, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. Tuesday, 8 o'clock. There'll be a van outside your house. Just get in and let us handle the rest. Then he was gone, back into the crowd of bikers who were finally starting to disperse, engines roaring to life one by one, as they headed back to wherever they'd come from. Marcus stood in the doorway and watched them go. The parking lot emptied slowly, the thunder of motorcycles fading into the distance, until only a few stragglers remained, finishing their coffees, saying their goodbyes, pressing last-minute donations into Marcus's hands. By 2 o'clock, the grind was back to normal. The regular Saturday crowd filtered in, oblivious to what had happened that morning, ordering their usual drinks and settling into their usual seats. Marcus moved through his shift on autopilot, his mind still reeling from everything that had occurred. When he got home that evening, his mother was sitting up on the couch, a rare occurrence lately, a sign that today was one of her better days. Jade was beside her, showing her something on her phone, both of them laughing at whatever they were looking at. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them. His mother looked thin, fragile, her hair growing back in patches after the latest round of chemo, but she was laughing. She was present. She was still here. Marcus! Jade spotted him first. Mom made dinner. Actual dinner, not just soup. It's just pasta, his mother said, but she was smiling. Nothing fancy. Marcus crossed the room and sat down beside her, careful not to jostle her too much. He pulled the envelope from his jacket, the one with the cash, the checks, the handwritten notes from strangers who'd become something more. Mom, I need to tell you something. He told her everything. The note he'd slipped under Cole's cup, the phone call that night, the meeting at Ironside Customs, the bikers who'd shown up that morning, the money they'd raised, the fund they'd created. He told her about Maria and the resources she'd found, about the grants and programs that would help cover the medical bills, about the scholarship for young caregivers that might let him go to college after all. His mother listened without interrupting. When he finished, her eyes were wet, her thin hands trembling as she reached for the envelope. These people, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, they did all this for us? For you? They did it because I asked for help. Marcus took her hand. I know you always taught me to be self-sufficient, to handle my own problems, but I couldn't do it alone anymore. I was drowning, Mom, and when I finally reached out, these people, these strangers, they reached back. His mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled him into a hug, her arms thin but strong, her body shaking with silent tears. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. So proud. I didn't do anything. You asked for help. That's the hardest thing in the world to do. She pulled back and looked at him, her eyes fierce despite the tears. Your father never could. He carried everything alone and it broke him. I always worried you'd be the same way. Marcus thought about his father, dead now for 6 years, a heart attack at 42 that the doctors said was stress-related. He'd worked himself to death, trying to provide for his family, never asking for help, never admitting he was struggling. Marcus had been 12 when it happened, old enough to understand, old enough to swear he'd be different. But he hadn't been different. He'd carried the same weight, told the same lies, pretended everything was fine while he slowly drowned. If Cole hadn't left that note under his cup, if Marcus hadn't found the courage to write back, "I almost didn't reach out," he admitted. "I almost threw the note away. But you didn't." His mother squeezed his hand. "That's what matters. You didn't." They sat together on the couch, mother and son, the envelope of money between them like a promise. Jade had gone quiet, sensing the weight of the moment, her phone forgotten in her lap. "Tuesday's the appointment," Marcus said. "They're sending a van to take us, and there'll be people there, at the hospital, in the waiting room. We won't be alone." His mother nodded slowly. Then, "We won't be alone." She said it like a revelation, like something she was just beginning to understand. And maybe she was. Maybe they both were. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside, a family sat together in the gathering dark, holding on to each other in the fragile, precious hope that tomorrow might be different. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough. Tuesday arrived with a gray sky and a chill in the air that felt like a warning. Marcus was awake before dawn, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, running through every possible outcome of the appointment. The treatment was working, and his mother would recover. The treatment wasn't working, and they'd have to try something else. The cancer had spread, and there was nothing more to be done. Each scenario played out in his mind like a movie he couldn't stop watching, each one ending differently, each one leaving him more anxious than the last. At 7:30, he heard the rumble. He went to the window and looked out. A white van was parked at the curb, its engine idling. Behind it, arranged in a neat row, were 6 motorcycles, Cole's Harley at the front, followed by bikes Marcus recognized from the gathering at Ironside Customs. He got dressed quickly and went to wake his mother. She was already up, sitting on the edge of her bed, her hands folded in her lap. "I heard them," she said. "The motorcycles. They're here to take us to the hospital, like they promised." His mother looked up at him, and Marcus saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen in months. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. Courage, maybe, or resolve. "Help me get dressed," she said. "I want to look nice." They took their time. Marcus helped her into a soft blue sweater, her favorite, the one she'd worn to his high school graduation, and a pair of comfortable pants. He brushed her hair, what there was of it, and she put on a touch of lipstick, a small act of defiance against the disease that had taken so much from her. Jade was waiting in the living room, dressed for school, but clearly unwilling to leave. "I want to come," she said. "I want to be there." Marcus looked at his mother, who nodded. "Call the school," she said. "Tell them she's sick. One day won't matter." They walked out together, Marcus and his mother, Jade trailing behind, and found Cole waiting by the van. He was wearing his leather vest, his expression serious but warm. "Morning, Mrs. Webb." He opened the van door and offered his hand to help her inside. "We've got a smooth ride lined up for you. Climate-controlled, comfortable seats, the works." "Thank you." Marcus's mother took his hand and climbed into the van, moving slowly but steadily. "For everything." "Don't thank me yet. Save it for when we've got something to celebrate." The drive to the hospital took 45 minutes. Marcus sat in the back, with his mother and Jade, watching the motorcycles through the window as they flanked the van like an honor guard. They stayed in formation the entire way, never too close, never too far, a constant presence that said more than words ever could. At the hospital, they found a crowd waiting. Not a huge crowd, maybe 24 people, but enough to fill the lobby with leather vests and kind faces. Maria was there, clipboard in hand, coordinating something with the front desk. A few riders Marcus recognized from the coffee shop stood near the elevator, holding cups of coffee and speaking in low voices. Others sat in the waiting area, their presence transforming the sterile hospital lobby into something warmer, something human. "What is all this?" Marcus's mother asked, her voice trembling. "This is family," Cole said simply. "They wanted to be here, in case you needed anything." A nurse appeared, looking slightly overwhelmed by the unusual crowd. "Mrs. Webb, we're ready for you." Marcus started to follow, but his mother stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "Stay here. she said. "With Jade. I need to do this part alone." "Mom, I mean it, Marcus." Her voice was firm, but her eyes were soft. "You've carried me this far. Now let me walk the last few steps myself." She squeezed his hand, kissed Jade on the forehead, and followed the nurse down the hallway. Marcus watched until she disappeared around a corner, then sank into a chair in the waiting room, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. Jade sat beside him, her small hand finding his. "She's going to be okay," she said. "I know she is." Marcus couldn't speak. He just held his sister's hand and stared at the hallway where his mother had vanished, willing himself to believe. The wait was 2 hours. 2 hours of sitting in hard plastic chairs, of drinking bad coffee from the hospital cafeteria, of making small talk with bikers who'd driven across the state to sit in a waiting room with strangers. Cole sat nearby, occasionally checking his phone, occasionally stepping outside to take a call. Maria brought Marcus a sandwich he couldn't eat, and a bottle of water he finished without tasting. At 11:15, the nurse reappeared. "Mr. Webb, your mother's asking for you." Marcus was on his feet before she finished speaking. He followed her down the hallway, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, past exam rooms and nurses' stations and 100 closed doors that could have held 100 different futures. His mother was in a small room at the end of the hall, sitting on an exam table, still wearing her blue sweater. A doctor stood beside her, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, holding a folder full of papers. "Marcus." His mother's voice was strange, thick with something he couldn't identify. "Come here." He crossed the room in 3 steps and took her hand. It was trembling, but her grip was strong. "The scans came back," she said. "The doctor has the results." Marcus looked at the doctor, bracing himself for the worst. He'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. The somber expression, the careful words, the condolences that came before the death sentence. He'd prepared himself for it, armored himself against it, built walls around his heart to absorb the blow. But the doctor was smiling. "The tumors have shrunk," she said, "significantly. The treatment is working better than we hoped." She opened the folder and showed Marcus a series of images, black and white scans he couldn't really read, but which apparently told a story of hope. "We're not out of the woods yet. There's more treatment ahead, more scans, more waiting, but this is the best news we could have gotten today." Marcus heard the words, but they didn't make sense. He'd been prepared for disaster, braced for tragedy. Good news felt like a foreign language, something he'd forgotten how to understand. "She's going to be okay?" His voice came out as a whisper. "She's responding well. Very well." The doctor closed the folder. "With continued treatment, I'm optimistic about her prognosis. There are no guarantees in medicine, but this is good, Marcus. This is really good." Marcus looked at his mother. She was crying, not the quiet tears of grief he'd grown used to, but something different, something brighter. "I told you," she said, squeezing his hand. "I told you I wasn't ready to go yet." He couldn't speak. The walls he'd built around his heart were crumbling, and everything he'd been holding back came flooding out. He sat down on the edge of the exam table and wrapped his arms around his mother, holding her like he had when he was a child, when she was the strong one and he was the one who needed comfort. They stayed like that for a long time, mother and son, crying together in a small room at the end of a hospital hallway. When they finally emerged into the waiting room, the crowd was still there. Cole stood up as soon as he saw them, his eyes searching Marcus's face for news. Maria set down her clipboard. Jade jumped to her feet, her expression caught between hope and fear. Marcus didn't know what to say. He looked at his mother, who was smiling through her tears, and then at the sea of leather-clad strangers who'd become family. "It's working," he said. "The treatment's working." For a moment, there was silence. Then Cole let out a whoop that echoed off the hospital walls, and the waiting room erupted. People were hugging, crying, slapping each other on the back. A nurse came out to shush them and ended up getting pulled into a hug by Maria. Jade threw herself at her mother, nearly knocking her over, and Marcus caught them both and held on tight. Cole found him in the chaos, grabbed him by the shoulders, and looked him dead in the eyes. "I told you," he said. "I told you that you weren't alone. You believed me? I believe you now." "Good." Cole pulled him into a hug, brief but fierce, and then stepped back, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Now let's get your family home. We've got a celebration to plan." They walked out of the hospital together, the whole strange, wonderful group of them. The motorcycles were still parked outside, gleaming in the midday sun that had broken through the clouds. Marcus helped his mother into the van, then turned to look at the riders who were mounting up, preparing to escort them home. "Thank you," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Thank you all. I don't know how to—" "You don't have to know how," Cole said, straddling his Harley. "You just have to pass it on. Someday, when you see someone drowning, you throw them a rope. That's the deal. That's the only payment we'll ever accept." He kicked the engine to life, and the other bikes followed suit, a chorus of thunder that filled the hospital parking lot. Marcus climbed into the van with his mother and sister, and they pulled out of the lot with 6 motorcycles flanking them, chrome and leather, and the rumble of engines all the way home. His mother leaned against his shoulder, exhausted but peaceful. Jade was already texting friends, sharing the news, her thumbs flying across the screen. And Marcus sat between them, feeling for the first time in 2 years like the weight on his shoulders might actually lift. The treatment was working. His mother was fighting. The future, uncertain, fragile, but real, was finally something he could imagine again. Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds, flooding the highway with light. The motorcycles roared, the van hummed, and a family that had been falling apart began, slowly, to come back together. It wasn't over. There were more treatments ahead, more scans, more waiting rooms, and sleepless nights. But they weren't facing it alone anymore. They had family, not just the one they'd been born into, but the one they'd found along the way. That made all the difference. That made everything possible. 1 year later, Marcus stood behind a podium in the gymnasium of Cedar Lake High School, looking out at a sea of faces he barely recognized. The graduating class of 2024 sat before him in their caps and gowns, fidgeting with excitement, whispering to their neighbors, counting down the minutes until they could throw their mortarboards in the air and be done with this chapter of their lives. Parents and grandparents filled the bleachers, cameras ready, tissues clutched in anticipation of the inevitable tears. And in the front row, sitting between Cole and Maria, was Marcus's mother. She looked different than she had a year ago. Her hair had grown back, thicker than before, with a streak of silver at the temple that she refused to dye because she said she'd earned it. Her cheeks had color again. Her eyes were bright. She was still thin, still tired more easily than she used to, but she was here. She was alive. She was watching her son graduate. Marcus cleared his throat and looked down at the notes he'd prepared. He'd been asked to give the commencement speech, valedictorian, against all odds, despite the 2 jobs and the sleepless nights, and the year when he'd been certain he wouldn't make it to graduation at all. The principal had called it an inspiring story of perseverance. Marcus just called it surviving. "I'm supposed to talk about the future," he began, his voice echoing through the gymnasium, "about dreams and possibilities and all the things that lie ahead, and I will. But first, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about asking for help." He looked at his mother, who smiled and nodded. "A year ago, I was drowning. My mom was sick, my family was struggling, and I didn't know how we were going to make it through. I worked 2 jobs and still couldn't pay the bills. I smiled at people all day and went home to cry at night. I carried everything alone because I thought that's what strong people did. I thought asking for help was weakness." He paused, letting the words settle. "I was wrong. Asking for help is the hardest thing you can do. It requires admitting that you can't handle everything on your own, that you need other people, that you're human. It requires trusting that someone will catch you if you fall. And it requires the courage to be vulnerable in a world that tells us vulnerability is something to be ashamed of." Marcus looked at Cole, who was sitting with his arms crossed, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "A stranger saw me struggling. He left a note under a coffee cup, offering to listen. I almost threw it away. I almost convinced myself that I didn't need anyone, that I could keep carrying the weight alone. But something made me reach out. Something made me write back. And that one small act, that one moment of courage, changed everything." He told them the story. Not all of it. There wasn't time for that, but enough. The note under the cup, the phone call in the dark kitchen, the motorcycles that had filled the parking lot of the grind, bringing money and resources and something more valuable than either, the knowledge that he wasn't alone. "Those people didn't know me," Marcus said. "They had no obligation to help, but they did it anyway, because that's what community means. That's what family means. Not just the people you're born to, but the people who show up when you need them, the people who see you drowning and throw you a rope, even when it would be easier to look away." He looked out at his classmates, at the faces that had been strangers a year ago and were now something more. I'm not standing here because I'm special. I'm standing here because people believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, because strangers became family, because one person saw me struggling and decided to do something about it. He took a breath. So here's what I want you to take with you today. As you go out into the world and start your lives, be the person who sees, be the person who reaches out, be the person who throws the rope, even when you're not sure anyone will grab it, because you never know when your small act of kindness might change someone's life. You never know when the stranger in front of you is carrying something too heavy to bear alone. Marcus looked at his mother one more time. She was crying now, happy tears, she'd tell him later, the best kind, and so was Jade, sitting beside her in a dress she'd picked out herself. And if you're the one who's drowning, if you're carrying something you can't handle alone, please, ask for help. It's not weakness, it's courage. It's the first step toward finding the people who will stand beside you, no matter what. It's how you find your family. He stepped back from the podium, and the gymnasium erupted in applause. His classmates rose to their feet, followed by the parents, in the bleachers, followed by everyone else. Marcus stood there, overwhelmed, watching the standing ovation wash over him like a wave. Cole was on his feet too, clapping harder than anyone, his weathered face split by a grin that transformed him from intimidating to almost boyish. Maria was wiping her eyes, and his mother was standing, despite the fatigue, despite everything, her hands pressed together in applause for the son who had carried her through the darkest year of her life. After the ceremony, after the caps had been thrown and the photos taken and the hugs exchanged, Marcus found Cole in the parking lot. The biker was leaning against his Harley, watching the crowd disperse, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. "Hell of a speech," Cole said. "I meant every word." "I know you did. That's what made it good." They stood in comfortable silence, watching families pile into cars and drive away, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. "What's next?" Cole asked. "You got plans?" Marcus nodded. "State University, full scholarship, the one Maria found for young caregivers. I start in the fall." "That's good. That's real good." Cole pushed himself off the bike and faced Marcus directly. "What are you going to study?" "Social work. I want to help families like mine, people who are struggling, who don't know where to turn." Marcus met Cole's eyes. "I want to be the one who throws the rope." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his vest and pulled out something small, a patch, round and embroidered, bearing the insignia of Ironside Customs. "This is for you," he said. "It's not membership, that's a whole different thing, but it means you're family, official, permanent. Wherever you go, whatever you do, you've got people who have your back." Marcus took the patch. It was warm from Cole's pocket, heavier than it looked. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep doing what you're doing. Say you'll remember where you came from. Say you'll pass it on, the way I passed it on to you, the way someone passed it on to me." "I will." Marcus tucked the patch into his pocket next to his heart. "I promise." Cole nodded, satisfied. Then he mounted his bike, kicked the engine to life, and raised a hand in farewell. "See you around, kid. Don't be a stranger." He rode off, the rumble of his Harley fading into the evening air, leaving Marcus alone in the parking lot with his diploma in one hand and a future he was finally ready to face. His mother appeared at his side, moving slowly but steadily, Jade holding her arm for support. "Ready to go home?" she asked. "Yeah." Marcus looked at the patch in his pocket, at the diploma in his hand, at the two people who had been his reason for fighting through the hardest year of his life. "Yeah, I'm ready." They walked to the car together, mother, son, daughter, leaving behind the gymnasium where Marcus had given a speech about asking for help, about finding family, about the courage it takes to admit you can't do it alone. The sun was setting over Cedar Lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine rumbled, a reminder that family was never far away, that help was always just a phone call away, that the rope was always there for those brave enough to grab it. Marcus drove home slowly, savoring the moment. His mother dozed in the passenger seat, exhausted but peaceful. Jade chattered from the back about the graduation party they were going to throw, the cake she wanted to order, the decorations she'd already planned. And Marcus listened and smiled and felt, for the first time in as long as he could remember, like everything was going to be okay, not because the hard times were over, they weren't. His mother still had treatments ahead, still had good days and bad days, still faced a future that was uncertain at best. Marcus still had student loans to worry about, a career to build, 1,000 challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But he wasn't facing any of it alone. That was the gift Cole had given him. Not just money, not just resources, but the knowledge that he belonged to something bigger than himself. That there were people in the world who would show up when he needed them. That family wasn't just blood, it was choice and courage and the willingness to reach out when you were drowning. Marcus had reached out, and hands had grabbed his. Now it was his turn to extend that hand to others, to see the people who were struggling, to be the one who left notes under coffee cups and made phone calls in the middle of the night and showed up when no one else would. That was the chain. That was the legacy. That was the only payment anyone had ever asked for. And Marcus intended to pay it forward for the rest of his life. The car pulled into the driveway of the small house where he'd grown up, where he'd cried and struggled and almost given up. His mother stirred awake, blinking in the fading light. Jade was already out of the car, running to unlock the front door. "We're home," Marcus said. His mother smiled and took his hand. "Yes," she said, "we are." They walked inside together into a house that had once felt like a prison and now felt like a sanctuary. The door closed behind them, and the evening settled in, warm and quiet and full of promise. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. And somewhere out on the highway, a convoy of motorcycles was riding toward wherever they were needed next, carrying hope, carrying help, carrying the unshakable belief that no one should ever have to face the darkness alone. The chain continued. It always would. And Marcus Webb, coffee shop kid, valedictorian survivor, was, proud to be a link in it,